Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar,
And I'm Yuxin.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we'll be discussing the mysterious Dark Angels.
That's right, Zekthar, and this week we'll be discussing the Primarch of the Dark Angels, one Lionel Jonson.
Well, last time we left Lionel Jonson in the warp, and we're going to keep him there for a while because we have to catch up with his brother, Rabute Gilliman. Now, after the horrific events of the Battle of Kolth, when Lorgar betrayed Gilliman and ambushed the Ultramarines, badly crippling the Legion and making them no longer a viable threat to Horus's plans to drive on Terra. Not only was Gilliman's men slaughtered, but Erebus had managed to complete his blasphemous ritual on Kolth's surface, which summoned a rune storm to the galaxy's eastern fringe, a monstrous warp storm larger and more destructive than anything spacefaring humanity had witnessed since the days of the Age of Strife. To restore order, he did two things. One, he established a second empire. Therefore, people could still count on law and order instead of falling to their baser instincts. You know, the looting and destroying bit that plagues humanity when there is no rule of law. Two, he set up a means to help navigate their void ships through the warp without the beacon of the Astronomicon, through the use of the recently discovered Xenos technology on the world of Sotha, known as the Pharaohs. What he didn't realize was the Pharaohs served another purpose. It also was a beacon that transmitted through space in the warp and became a calling card for not one legion of Space Marines, but two. Now, before the first shows up with their Primarch, Lionel Jonson, I must point out a couple of things about this new empire, starting with the most important. Rabute Gilliman did not want to be emperor, and he built the Imperium Secundus out of a desperate necessity and refused to be called emperor, simply being known as regent. He had a problem with being emperor on a couple of fronts. One, he truly didn't think his father was dead, and to betray the man that had given him his purpose brought him to despair. He also had been recorded to say that he thought that he could either rule the empire or command its forces, but not both. And lastly, he was afraid that his Ultramarines would think that he was trying to take over, much like Horus the Betrayer was doing. Now, I'm thinking out loud here, but we all know he could definitely rule the empire and command the troops. But the last bit, I think, really shows where Gilliman's thoughts were. I think Rabute was smart enough to realize that if he declared himself emperor too soon, it would spark all sorts of revolts, not just within the populace, but his own troops. What he really needed was a figurehead, someone who he could rule through. And at first, when he heard of a friendly Primarch had entered his space, he thought he had found it. Unfortunately, that Primarch happened to be Lionel Jonson. Gilliman was overjoyed that one of his wayward brothers had arrived during his hour of need. But of all of his brothers, he wondered why it had to be the Lion who had found his way through the storm. Though the Primarch of the Ultramarines greatly admired the Lord of the First Legion, he felt there had always been a shadow upon him. The Lion dwelled in secrets and played his cards too close, for he walked by himself when he pleased. There was too much of the wild forest in him. The Lion should have been as noble as any of Gilliman's brother Primarchs.
You mean like Russ or the Khan? Yeah, they were really noble in his eyes. Sorry.
But they'd never been close, and there was too much about him that was sly. Yet despite his personal misgivings, Gilliman welcomed the Lion with the formality and respect due to his prestigious position. Rabute Gilliman offered his brother an honor guard of almost 47,000 fighting souls, not to mention the million or more civilians crowded into the streets of Macragge for a glimpse of the Lion Lord and his famous warriors. The people of Macragge came out in force to celebrate the arrival of the Lion. After the grand parade, the brothers retired to a private chamber to discuss what to do. Yet more importantly, Gilliman was going to give the Lion his sales pitch of a new empire. Gilliman revealed his plans to the Lion for the continuity of the Imperium, that it must endure in one form or another. Rabute then explained to his brother that he was already in the process of establishing a second imperium upon the corpse of the first. Gilman did not pretend to hide his motives, but he made clear that he was only establishing such an empire in order to keep the flame of his father's dream alive. This was not about empire building or seeking to claim the throne for himself, as Horus had done. The Avenging Son already had a stellar empire in his possession, Ultramar, the 500 worlds. Gilman wanted his brother to know that his only intention was to ensure the survival of their father's dream. Terra might have fallen, and their father might already be dead. Whatever the reality of the situation they faced, the rune storm prevented them from knowing the truth. He needed a line to understand that he was not Horus. Gilman explained to his brother that the difference between himself and Horus was that he did not want to be the new emperor. The Lord Macragge proposed that the Lion take up this mantle as the new regent of the Imperium Secundus rather than himself. Now, while Lionel Jonson had always wanted the position of War Master, the thought of ruling a galactic empire had always been distasteful. The Lion knew his purpose in the universe: to destroy the Empire's enemies, grind them to dust. He was a warrior, not a statesman. The Lion balked at this idea of becoming regent, and no matter how Rabute pried him, the Lion refused. While given enough time, the Lord of the Ultramarines might have swayed him, but it did not matter, because their brother, the Angel, Sanguinius, arrived next. A far better pick. Rabute was able to convince the Lord of the Blood Angels to take the role as Emperor, while Gilliman himself chose the title of Lord Warden, and the title of Lord Protector was bequeathed to Lionel Jonson. Now, I must state here that this has some eerie similarities to the Roman triumvirate of Terran 42. Not the first one, which is remembered more with Pompey Magnus, Julius Caesar, and Marcus Crassus, but the second one with Gaius Octavius, Mark Antony, and Marcus Lepidus. Rabute Gilliman as the part of Octavius, a master statesman and empire builder. His brother the Lion, a warrior much like Mark Antony, and Sanguinius, the poor fellow stuck in the middle as Lepidus. Who knows what would have happened if the Imperium Secundus had lasted longer? Perhaps it would have split in two, with the Lion on one side and Gilliman on the other, like it did in Rome. Personally, I think that wouldn't happen for a couple reasons. Well, I did say that the relationship of these three was similar to the Second Triumvirate. Their strengths resemble the first. While many remember Pompey and Caesar, most forget how powerful Crassus actually was. He wasn't a third wheel, far from it. He held the balance much like a third leg on a footstool. Because of this, the Roman Republic thrived under the leadership of these three men, and it wasn't until Crassus died that it all went down the drain. In the same way, I think Sanguinius would have kept the peace and their empire would have flourished under his rule. Yet, some at the time would disagree. Back on Terra, Malcador the Sigillite had suspected that Gilman might try to build his own empire if cut off from the throne world, and the regent of Terra was nervous that the Primarch might attempt to usurp the Emperor's power. Malcador even hoped that the Dark Angels would stop Gilliman if he tried to secede in any way that was similar to what Horus had done. He never knew that the Lion's forces had joined Gilliman to support the Imperium Secundus project. But this is all conjecture. The Empire only lasted 5 years. Once the three figured out that the Emperor was in fact still alive, they dissolved the Imperium Secundus, mustered their forces, and forced their way through the Rune Storm. Yet, even before this, the Imperium was already starting to falter, thanks to our old chum, Conrad Kurz. Now, he had escaped the Invincible Reason and was back to his old tricks, causing havoc on Macragge. Eventually, both Gilliman and the Lion confronted the cornered Kurz. Their attempts to kill him were unsuccessful, as the Night Lord's Primarch had laid a cutting trap. He brought an entire chapel down upon the two Primarchs through the use of planted explosives and fled the scene. Gilliman and the Lion were only saved through the direct intervention of the loyalist Iron Warrior, Warsmith Barabbas d'Antioch, who was communicating with Gilliman at the time of the attack through a portal that was opened by the Pharaohs. On instinct, the Warsmith reached through the portal and pulled the two Primarchs to safety on Sotha, feeling directly responsible for the Night Haunter's rampage on Macragge. The Lion continued to obsessively hunt his wayward former brother for the next 2 Terran years. No matter how close he came, Conrad, much like on the Invincible Reason, always seemed just out of reach. While continuing his obsessive hunt for the elusive Night Haunter, the Lion and Gilliman continuously clashed over policy, especially in regards to the security of Imperium Secundus. They were particularly vexed with how best to deal with the emergence of rebels on the crag that the Lion was certain Kurz had instigated. Now, following a suicide bombing of an Astartes convoy, the Lion used the First Legion to establish martial law on the crag. Certain that Kurz was hiding within the rebellious Illyrium region, the Lion advocated the use of massive orbital saturation bombardment of the region to ensure Kurz's death. Facing resistance from both Emperor Sanguinius and Gilliman, the Lion instead opted to deploy his legion's Dreadwing in order to flush out Kurz and the rebels. During an attack on the city of Alma Mons, the Lion finally cornered the elusive Night Lord's Primarch, and the two came to blows. After a brutal confrontation, the Lion eventually emerged victorious and questioned his brother why he had turned away from the Emperor, to which Kurz simply replied, "Why not?" Kurz went on to explain that there was a monster in his head that he could not stop. Though he finally had Kurz at his mercy, the Lion couldn't bring himself to kill his brother. Much like Leman Russ could not bring himself to kill Horus with the Spear of Russ. But you fine folks knew that already because you listened to my Vox way back in the day, the Spear of Russ. Yet Conrad was no Horus, and even though he could not kill his brother, he made sure that Conrad could cause no more harm. He ripped off Kurz's backpack with his battle plate, lifted him high over his head, and brutally brought the Night Haunter down across his knee, breaking Kurz's spine and paralyzing him. The Lion then dragged the broken Conrad Kurz before Sanguinius and Gilliman to stand trial. A triumvirate was later held where Kurz defended his actions, but refused to admit his guilt. Since each of the Primarchs had been created to perform a specific function, Kurz argued that he merely acted according to his own nature, and therefore had committed no crimes. The Night Lord's Primarch further divided Gilliman and the Lion by accusing the latter of secretly ordering orbital bombardment in direct violation of Gilliman's orders to prevent civilian casualties. Enraged, the Lion sought to kill Kurz, but was halted by the words of Sanguinius as Gilliman snatched Lionel Jonson's sword and broke the blade across his armored thigh in his fury. Jonson, needless to say, was furious, but Sanguinius dismissed the Lord Protector, ending the triumvirate. The Lion was then banished from the Imperium Secundus. Taking his leave, the Dark Angels withdrew from a crag only hours later. Standing in the chamber of the Tucholka engine, aboard the Invincible Reason, the Lion brooded over recent events. He questioned his actions over the course of the last few decades, the banishment of Luther, the death of Nimiel, as well as other decisions he had come to regret. As the Dark Angels made their final preparations to depart back to Caliban, the Lion went back to the Tucholka engine's chamber. He ordered the device to teleport himself and Holgen, Deathbringer, the voted lieutenant of the Deathwing, back to Macragge. As Sanguinius prepared to execute Kurz for his crimes, both the Lion and his lieutenant teleported directly into the chamber and told Sanguinius to stop. As troops entered the room, demanding the Lion's surrender, Jonson explained his reason for the intrusion. He reasoned that Kurz had the ability to see precognitive visions of potential futures, and repeated the Night Haunter's claim that his death would one day come at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor. If this was true, the Lion reasoned, then it was proof that the Emperor was still alive, beyond the barrier of the Runestorm. Sanguinius knew the Lion's explanation rang true, as he recognized that his own precognitive visions of his inevitable death would also eventually come to pass. When Gilliman demanded to know what would become of Kurz, the Lion knelt before his two brothers and promised that he would be Kurz's jailer. Now, Kurz remained captive aboard the Invincible Reason, and occasionally the Lion would speak with him in an attempt to gather information from his prophetic visions. But the Night Haunter rarely proved cooperative. In the wake of these revelations, the Imperium Secundus was dissolved by the three Primarchs as an unfortunate mistake. The three Primarchs led their legions in an attempt to breach the Runestorm and reach Terra to defend the Emperor, now that they knew he was still alive. Now, as I said before, this truly dissolved the Imperium Secundus, and the three Primarchs mustered their forces and eventually succeeded in pushing through the Runestorm and forcing their way to Holy Terra. Now, before we move on, what do you think of this strange Imperium Secundus and this triumvirate, brother?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is, as much as you said, it probably would work I'm not necessarily sure it would, mainly just because of other events that would pop up outside of their control. I mean, if
Like
they had
what?
been left in like that vacuum of just the area that they were currently in, I was
Mm.
able to stay in that particular vacuum instead of having to also reach out further if the Emperor had like died. I think
Well,
conflict would have risen there and they may not have been able to hold it together.
well, it would have been that would have been kind of interesting because if they had never come to the idea anyways that the emperor was still alive, right? And they would have tried to keep it holding together. Now, Conrad Kurz is kind of a wrench thrown in this whole thing, but let's say they found him on the invincible reason. As he was trying to leave the ship, they found him. Okay, so then you got these
And
three
removed it.
guys. It'd be kind of interesting because if the Ultramarines never showed up, then I don't think, anyways, Rogel Dorn lives, which means that the Emperor doesn't live, which means that Horus takes over half of the Imperium, right?
Okay.
So when the rune storm comes down, anyways, then you have two sides, anyways, that in theory, anyways, should be pretty comparable to each other, right?
Um, the comparability between the two would be debatable because at this point, I don't know how much land they had covered.
Or planets.
Yeah.
Well, I think actually the Imperium Secondus would be more at a disadvantage because, quite frankly, there wouldn't be as many Space Marines.
Well, and
true,
also they didn't have Mars.
yeah, that would be a huge problem. I mean, I'm sure there were other fortress worlds on the other side of the rune storm, but not as many, and not Mars in particular. I don't know. I think, anyways, that the war would have continued on. I don't know. It also depends, anyways, on if anybody could actually take out Horus at that point. Because if they drop the
Maybe.
runes, because if they drop the rune storm, then and let's say Terra was destroyed, and they drop the rune storm, right? So that means that you've got the only loyalists that would be left at that point would be, well, the three that are there: the wolves, the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, and the Iron Hands. What's left of them? So the Shattered Legions and the Space Wolves. It's not looking good. Let's put it that way. Even though they still do have, anyways, the Dark Angels and the Ultramarines, so they have more forces than anybody else when the whole thing got started.
Right.
But then again, Horus would have problems. He had problems just keeping his traitor brothers in line long enough for the siege of Terra. I mean, to take out Ultramar and the 500 planets, that would I think it would take a while.
Yeah.
So it'd be kind of the concept of, could he keep his brothers in line that long? And I don't know. I mean, Fulgrim was kind of already had one snake tail out the door, so to speak. Yeah, he'd already banished Lorgar by that point. So
I wouldn't be surprised if Horus ended up at some point being stabbed in the back.
by Perturabo, probably.
Yeah, because I think Perturabo at the point of
He's kind of disgusted with Horus by this point.
he's disgusted. And he's like he's lost it. He's already thinking he's lost it.
It's like, you used to be quite brilliant. Now you're just insane.
Yeah, and so I could just see him just killing Horus.
Yeah,
I mean,
but that's
it'd be
kind of,
difficult to do, but I'm pretty sure he'd be able to figure out a way to do it.
hearsay. The real question is that, do you think, anyways, those three could have eventually come to a point, anyways, where they actually would work together? I mean, it only lasted 5 years. It got dissolved because, I mean, they knew the Emperor was alive, and quite frankly, it was already kind of on its way out thanks to Conrad Kurz being Conrad Kurz and destroying everything. But by the way, if they'd just been a little bit more patient, Vulcan probably would have taken care of that for him.
Yeah.
They should just let Vulcan do his thing. But
Yeah. Well, Vulcan actually, he would have made, I think, not necessarily a better ruler, but I'd find him as a good sounding board.
yeah, maybe expand, anyways, that triumvirate into, having 4 people there.
Yeah, because
So-
I think he would be able to help mitigate things between them and find.
Maybe they
I mean,
make him the
St.
Grand
Crinius,
Duke.
that was one of the things that he would be doing, but I mean, gotta have more than just one guy trying to stop 2 people.
Right. Okay, yeah, I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts were. I
His
hadn't looked
gavel
into
is very big and do quite a bit more damage than just a slam on wood.
yeah. But yeah, I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts were. It is a very interesting aspect of what would have happened if Gilliman had actually created his own empire. I mean, right now, technically in the 42nd millennium, he kind of has his own empire, but he's still, anyways, it's not like he's in charge. He's still, I mean, he is in charge, but it's more like he's still trying to follow in his father's footsteps instead of, kind of branching out on his own like he would have done in the Imperium Secondus. Yeah, I thought it was always kind of an interesting food for thought.
Well, moving on.
Yeah. Yeah.
At some point before or during the Siege of Terra, the Astronomicon went dark for the Dark Angel's fleet. Fearing that Terra had fallen to Horus, L. Jonson became nihilistic and instead of moving towards Terra, pledged himself to vengeance through the destruction of as much of the traitor's territory as he could. Using the rationalization of attacking the traitor homeworlds in hope of drawing reinforcements away from Terra to his troops, L. Jonson oversaw the destruction of Chemos and Barbarus in a spiteful purge dubbed the Passage of the Angels. Without the Astronomicon, the Dark Angels continued to rely on the Tucholka engine for guidance through the warp. A wrathful Lionel Jonson then led the Dark Angels in wreaking havoc across the Southern Imperium in a campaign of revenge and extermination. It was designed to both punish the traitorous forces of War Master Horus and destroy their military assets in the region. By doing so, L. Jonson sought to prevent the War Master from creating a second front unified against Terra. The Primarch ordered the usage of the Dark Angel's Old Knight weaponry, and this resulted in a trail of blackened, scorched worlds that were loyal to Horus, to be left in their wake. Among those worlds that were destroyed by the Dark Angels during the campaign were the Traitor Legion homeworlds of the Emperor's Children, the Death Guard, and Nuceria, the adoptive world of the Primarch Angron. This systematic annihilation of resource-rich worlds deprived Horus of precious materials he needed in order to maintain a lengthy siege of Terra. This ultimately forced the War Master to hasten his planned invasion of the Sol system. Other Imperial forces also took part in the Dark Angels campaign as well. Some Imperials, however, had no choice but to fight beside the Dark Angels, or else they would earn L. Jonson's wrath for showing what he perceived as disloyalty to the Emperor and to the Imperium. The Primarch was so intent on his vengeance that L. Jonson would refuse to allow the Dark Angels to direct aid or take part in any Imperial battles that would deviate from his main objective. The devastation that was left in L. Jonson's wake as his forces quickly moved on to their next target also aided the Night Lords in creating numerous carrion realms across the southern realm of the galaxy. The Lion eventually ordered the Dark Angels fleet to head to Deliverance, the homeworld of the Raven Guard Legion, where Corvus Corax and Leman Russ of the Space Wolves Legion were currently mustering their forces. The Lion was quick to question Corax's absence from the major fronts of the war, but his wrath was quickly extinguished by Russ, who pointed out that the Space Wolves' own survival was still an asset of great worth, even if Terra remained beyond their reach. Russ declared they would join L. Jonson's so-called Crusade of Vengeance, including with Space Wolf warriors equipped with the new suits of Mark VI Corvus power armor produced on Kiavar. Yet Corax was cautious to commit his badly mauled legion to what he saw as a needlessly spiteful waste of resources for a purely emotional gain, and only assigned a small expeditionary force of the Raven Guard to accompany the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels. Eventually, the Dark Angels made course for Terra on the Lion's command, but arrived too late to influence the outcome of the Siege of Terra or prevent the Emperor from being mortally wounded by Horus and interred on the Golden Throne.
So, let me see if I got this right.
Okay.
Sanguinius shows up before the Siege of Terra. right?
Right.
Yeah. Then Rabute shows up after it's all over, right?
Yep.
And after the Ultramarines are done mopping up, then the lion shows up.
Correct.
Yuxin? How? They all left at the same time.
Well, Horus had a fleet basically blocked their way before they headed to Terra, and so the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels decide to hold them back and break open so that the Blood Angels could head to Terra.
Oh, so they could get to Terra before anybody else could get there?
Yeah, and then the Ultramarines ended up following when they could, and then the Dark Angels decided to first go on the crusade of vengeance before heading to Terra.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a whole lot more sense. So let me see if I got this right. After they take down the Rune Storm, what's in front of them is a whole bunch of Traitor Legion ships. So Gilliman and the line decide to stay behind to take care of them. That way, Sanguinis could make it to Terra before anybody else could. And then when they were done killing all these guys, Rabute realized that he needed to get to Terra as fast as he could. And the line was just like, the Emperor's dead. Let's murder everybody. And went on a crusade of vengeance.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that makes more sense. Carry on, sir.
Okay. In the aftermath of the Siege of Terra, the surviving loyalists rallied the reeling Imperium. The Archangels took a significant part in these battles, which later came to be called the Great Scouring. As they pursued the rebels, the First Legion diverted to nearby Caliban for the first time in many standard years, since the world had been enshrouded by the Ruin Storm and other warp storms since Horus's betrayal, but now was free of such navigational interference. For Lionel Jonson, one final act of treachery remained to be discovered. Upon the Dark Angels' arrival in orbit, they were fired upon from the surface. Pulling back the Legion fleet, L. Jonson tried to find out what had happened and discovered that Luther had become embittered by what he perceived as L. Jonson, always taking all the glory, had poisoned the minds of the Dark Angels garrison and the new recruits that had been left on the planet against their Primarch. Correctly believing that Luther and the planet-side Dark Angels had actually been tainted by chaos, infuriated Jonson ordered that Caliban be bombarded from orbit, destroying the planet's defenses. L. Jonson then led his forces to the surface and assaulted the Order's fortress monastery, where he confronted Luther in single combat. Luther, now a Chaos champion, had been elevated to strength equal to that of the Primarch through the gifts of the Chaos gods, and the two met in combat, the likes of which would not be seen again. The pair's duel leveled the monastery around them, but the planet was also taking a heavy toll. The sustained bombardment began to crack the surface of the planet's crust. The Dark Angels in orbit, unable to see the damage they were wreaking upon their homeworld. L. Jonson managed to wound Luther, but could not bring himself to kill the man who had once been his brother and mentor. Luther lashed out with a powerful sorceress attack that mortally wounded the Primarch. Luther then realized what he had done in his jealousy and anger, as if a veil of deceit had suddenly been lifted from in front of his eyes. He fell to the floor, unwilling to fight anymore, but it was too late for L. Jonson. The enraged, ruinous powers of chaos realized they had lost control of yet another of their pawns in the fight against the Emperor, and sent a massive warp storm to rack the surface of the planet. Caliban then broke apart under the strain, destroyed all but for the monastery of the Order, which had been protected by the potent defensive force fields. The rest of the Dark Angels, who had been converted by Luther to the worship of chaos, were sucked into the warp and scattered across the galaxy. From that time forward, they were named the Fallen Angels, or simply the Fallen. The Fallen were scattered throughout space and time, and Caliban tore itself apart under the strain of the ruinous powers' assault. When the Dark Angels descended to what remained of Caliban, now little more than an asteroid upon which stood the Order's fortress monastery, They searched the ruins and found Luther mumbling that Jonson had been taken by the Watchers in the dark and would return one day and forgive Luther for his sins. The Dark Angels could not find any trace of their Primarch. The truth was that the lion still lived, though he had been placed into a coma and had re-emerged into real space with the aid of the Watchers in the dark.
A what?
Watcher in the dark. You know, those little robed guys that tootle around behind the Dark Angels.
Oh, yeah. I love those little guys. We should see if we can procure one of these days.
Sounds fantastic. But what are your thoughts on the lion's scorched earth policy?
I think that he's someone that I don't think I'd ever want to piss off. You piss off the lion and whole world's burn. The funny thing is that they're always, whenever you talk about the guys that get irritated or pissed off or angry as the Primarchs, the lion's normally not one of the ones that kind of pops up. So normally, I mean, the first guy everybody thinks of is Angron, right? The angry one.
The angry one, yeah.
But then after that, Paris Manus was considered to be a hot-headed
Until he lost it.
And then Lehman Russ, that's the other guy that normally anyways had a shorter fuse than the rest of his brothers. But
right,
it seems like the line might not have had a very short fuse, but once it was cut, he really went off the deep end.
In general, yeah, the long fuse thing, when it came to the Crusade of Vengeance, yes. But apparently he forgot to tell his Dark Angels to stop firing on Caliban after a while.
Yeah.
It didn't do the planet much good and probably was a pretty big cause for why now Caliban is known as the Rock.
Well, I
mainly
think
because
and I think
just a piece of earth connected to the fortress monastery.
Right. I think, quite frankly, one of the reasons why he got as pissed as he did was just, quite frankly, anyways, with the thought, anyways, the Emperor being dead and the Emperor was dead, is this whole concept that his purpose literally went out the window. I mean, he fought and bled and killed for the Emperor. And now that with him gone, it was just kind of like, well, now what do I do? I mean, with the Imperium Secondus, at least he had, something to hold on to. But once they got past that, it was just like, really put yourself into, it's like, well, we destroy the enemies of the Empire. And I think he lost his head when he did that a little bit. I mean, he went back to his old ways anyways of just like kill or be killed aspect. I don't know. What do you think of it?
When it came to the Crusade of Vengeance part, I think there were positives and negatives when it came to it. Positives being that, yes, he was eliminating resources. Of course, the negative is some of the planets that I'm sure he wiped out may not necessarily been entirely, on Horse's side, per se.
It's like getting in contact.
Like you're in the subsector that this person was in. You must die. It's like, but we're farmers. Doesn't matter.
It's kind of like the beginning of World War II. Like instead of doing Operation Overlord, they landed on Normandy. It's like, I have a better idea. Why don't we just nuke France? What? There's people there we could save. Or we could nuke France, and then we could just roll right through.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good idea, Ike. That seemed to be kind of his reasoning. And yes, if we had nuked France, that would have worked too. But it would have been terrible. It would have.
Now, mind you, if it had been like the Night Lord's homeworld, I wouldn't have cared because that place was so messed up.
Well, some of them, yeah, I get some of them. Like, for instance, Mortarian's home planet. Yeah, that should have been destroyed a long time ago.
Well,
the one that Angron adopted. And then who's the other one? There's Fulgrim's planet.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I get anyways where it's like home bases to some of these guys, but if it's just, like planet Blue 13,
it just happens to be right next to one of those planets
that got invaded, and they're like, yeah, we don't want billions of people to die, so sure, I guess we'll make your guys' weapons for you.
Yeah.
I mean,
or we'll supply you food.
or food or something. Yeah, that's the one anyways. Is like, I don't know. But we got to get moving on anyways, because there's a lot we got to cover of the lion in the 42nd millennium. Now, when the lion L. Jonson awoke, he did so in a mysterious realm known as Mirror Caliban, in M42 without his memories, after millennia of sleeping since the original Caliban's destruction. Now, this is where things are going to get pretty strange. After encountering the old king on the river.
Who?
The Big E, ironically, whose waters played a song that he could hear. The lion was approached by a watcher in the dark, and he asked it where they were. The diminutive figure would simply reply, before informing the Primarch of the king's condition and to be aware of the shadows that dwelled near him. The lion then moved on to discover a domed building. But once more, the watcher appeared and warned the Primarch against entering it, stating he was not yet strong enough to safely do so. When an annoyed lion asked what he should be doing instead to make sense of what he was, the watcher told the Primarch to follow his nature. This led Lionel Jonson to follow the stench of corruption until the trees of the Mirror Caliban were replaced by those of the ruined world of Camarth. It was there that the Primarch encountered the fallen angel Zabriel, which caused L. Jonson's memories to return to him. As time went on, the Primarch learned how to freely enter Mirror Caliban and to use it to reach other worlds. By focusing on where he wanted to go, L. Jonson caused the location to slowly appear within realm, until its forest finally fades away and the Primarch enters his destination. This ability is known as Forest Walk, which also allows Lionel Jonson to take others with him upon these journeys, and the Primarch has used it to great effect in his battles against the Imperium's foes.
So he has figured out a way to teleport. How does he do this? Is it psychic? Does he use the warp? Or is this some kind of mystical power that we haven't scientifically seen in this universe?
Sure. We'll go with that. Okay, honestly, there isn't a whole lot on forest walking capabilities the lion has. In fact, the only mentions I have found were ascribed by Mike Brooks's Son of the Forest. Regardless, I can tell you that every time he uses it, he ends up finding a fallen angel. Why? Not even the Primarch knows. Nor does he know if this feeling that leads him to his wayward sons is an instinct of his, or if another force within Mirror Caliban is pulling him towards the fallen angels. Regardless, the Lion has since formed a warband of these loyalist fallen, known as the Risen. Get it?
Sorry. This is like, so the fallen must be hidden. Well, except for he's collecting them. What? Huh? The what we've been doing for thousands of years.
You know, the funny part about this is that, he's eventually going to forest walk right into Cypher. Now that will be an interesting conversation. Yeah. But anyways, alongside Zabriel, his growing loyalist forces have risen, and the emerging Lion Guard Auxilia, Lionel Jonson worked to save his newly claimed region of Imperium Nihilus from the 10,000 Eyes warband, battling the 10,000 Eyes on Camarth and Avalis. On the world of Sable Lion, L. Jonson was briefly captured by the fallen sorceress lord Seraphax. The fallen sorcerer revealed he intended to remove the lion's soul from his body and use it as a puppet to gain audience with the emperor. Seraphax would then use the lion's slave form to kill the emperor, which Seraphax believed would elevate the master of mankind to a new warped deity to destroy both Chaos and Zeos. However, thanks to the intervention of the Risen, the lion was able to escape and defeat Seraphax. Now, after defeating Seraphax, the lion continued to master his forest walk and attempt to unravel the mystery of Mirror Caliban. The mysterious realm also once held the power sword Fealty and the Emperor's shield, until both were found by the Primarch. The latter was contained in the dome building the Watcher had warned him against entering, and upon doing so anyways, the lion fought a demon that could shapeshift into the forms of his brother Primarchs. This ability caused him to be overwhelmed by the creature, until the lion found the Emperor's shield within the building and used its powers to destroy the demon. Now, shortly after claiming the Emperor's shield, the lion rendezvoused with a group of blood angels that had arrived to investigate rumors of the lion's return. And I just happen to have that excerpt from Mike Brooks's book. The Thunderhawk's forward ramps lowered, and warriors armored in blood red descended in unison. The lion feels a pang of sorrow at seeing Sanguinius' sons. It is one thing to know that his loyal brothers are gone, but quite another to see this reminder of them. Quite unexpectedly, the lion feels a rush of guilt. Why should I have been the one to survive? Out of all of us, why should it have been me? However, another part of him is weighing and assessing what he's seeing. 60 Space Marines is a potent force, even more so if they are armed, supplied, and organized by squads in a manner his sons currently cannot. What he could do if these 60 warriors were under his command. But of course, they are not. They are here to do him honor, plucked away from what must undoubtedly have been other vital engagements simply because of his status. And if their current commander decides he is a fraud, then the lion is under no illusion that these warriors are here to kill him. Then a new group of 10 Space Marines emerge from the central gunship, and between them comes a warrior in an incredibly ornate golden plate, with a jump pack rising from his back and his face masked. The lion's eyes fall upon that mask, and rage fills him.
Who are you?
He demands, striding forward. They assembled blood angels, who had their weapons held neutrally in parade form, bringing them up ready position as one, although they did not yet aim them. The lion does not care.
Who are you? To wear my brother's face.
Stand down, brothers, the masked warrior orders, and the blood angels lower their weapons once more. Then the gold-armored commander reaches up and removes his helm. The lion can see the distant echo of the angel there, but greatly distilled by time. The warrior's long hair is jet black, but threaded with silver, and his pale skin is drawn tight over high cheekbones, with faint blue veins visible beneath it. For all the power and command this Space Marine radiates, the lion can tell that he is ancient. I am Dante, commander of the Blood Angels. I greet you, Lionel Jonson, Lord of the Dark Angels and son of the Emperor. The Blood Angels drop to one knee, just as smoothly as their Thunderhawks landed. The lion frowns, abruptly feeling as though he has been wrong-footed.
You are satisfied with my identity?
If you would forgive me, my lord, you are older than I expected. But to have so readily and unprompted recognized the face of our Gene father says much. Besides, I have served the Emperor for over 1,000 years, and I have yet to meet a being with the same bearing as a Primarch, save for another Primarch. The lion blinks. Over 1,000 years? Dante was ancient indeed. And...
Wait,
he says, his mouth dry.
Another Primarch? Get up, all of you. Just tell me, one of my brothers yet lives?
My apologies, my lord, Dante says, rising back to his feet along with his warriors. I assumed word had arrived ahead of us. Lord Guilliman of Ultramar was revived and healed from his stasis, in which he had been locked for a millennia, and has launched the Indominus Crusade to take back the Imperium from its enemies. He fought his way through the Great Rift and came to rescue my chapter and our blood brothers, and brought reinforcements with him in the form of Primaris Marines, a new breed of warrior developed over 10,000 years. The lion's thoughts are whirling. The Imperium still existed. He's not being denounced as an imposter and plunged into an ugly civil war against his brother's sons. There are other bastions of humanity out here in the galaxy with which he can link up and fight back the darkness. However, one thought rises to the surface above all others. Rabute, I'm not alone.
Funny how disappearing for 10,000 years changes one's views.
What do you mean?
Well, originally, he originally sort of had this, he went from having I don't really care how I feel about him to I really don't like him after this Imperial Secundus.
Yeah. That whole break
now
sword across his knee. Yeah.
I think it's more like he's just glad that there's somebody else there.
Kind of, it's almost like a role reversal, anyways, of that Imperium Secundus when Gilliman's like, sweet, I have a brother showing up. Oh, it's the lion. It's almost kind of like the exact opposite. It's like the lion's like, sweet, there's another one of my brothers out there. Oh, it's Gilliman.
Well, at least it's somebody.
Yeah, I think it definitely has pushed a little bit more of that. But Anywho, boarding the Blood Angels' flagship, Absolution's Aya, the Lion made for the idolatrous system before using his forest walk to journey to the Wormwood amidst the fierce battle of idolatrous, reappearing before the Unforgiven as they battle the forces of Vashtor, the Black Legion, and the World Eaters.
Now, Vashtor's that minor god, right?
He's the mechanic. He's
the armor smith.
Yeah, he's the demon,
demons.
the demon engine guy. Yeah. He's the opposite of Belisarius Call, pretty much. He's Chaos's version of Belisarius Call.
Except for he's actually a demon.
Right.
Or,
and quite frankly, anyways, I know how much that you enjoy Belisarius Call. I know you like this guy so much more because he is on the other side. Yes. Vashtor.
They're about level, I say.
He is, yeah, he's quite terrible. But it is at this point that the World Eaters summon their greatest ally, the Father, Angron. The Blood and Dark Angels did battle with the Red Angel.
A lot of angels in this one.
Yeah, actually. Actually, quite frankly, I think all of them. But the Blood and the Dark Angels were no match for the Demon Primarch. Even with both Dante, Chapter Master of the Blood Angels, and Ezreal, Supreme Grandmaster of the Dark Angels, taking him on, it wasn't enough. And soon Dante was stricken down to the ground. Ezreal cried out in dismay as Angron threw back his head and roared his triumph. The Blood Angel's Chapter Master lay defenseless before him, open to the killing blow. Yet as Azrael watched powerless, shadows suddenly coiled about the Red Angel and his victim. Tendrils of mist obscured the figures, and from amidst the vapors spread incongruous green shoots of what looked to Azrael like plant life. Shifting shapes unfurled, resembling nothing so much as a sketch of a dream of half-remembered trees, their dense boughs more shadow than substance. In the next instant, Azrael's bewilderment gave way to awe. A tall figure in a flowing cloak stepped from the mists to place himself between Angron and Dante. Space Marines in black armor manifested around him and spread about down the steps, but Azrael barely noticed them. He could only stare at the warrior with the glowing blade and the glinting shield. It did not matter that Azrael had only seen him before in tapestries, frescoes, and stained glass. His very blood knew this warrior's identity. His gene seed sang with the truth, teetering as close to being overwhelmed as it was possible for a Space Marine to come. Azrael went to one knee. He was looking at the lion, returned to his Gene Sons at their hour of their greatest need. The Battle Brothers of the Deathwing bellowed amazed oaths as word spread from one band of Dark Angels to the next. The survivors of the Strike Force surged into their foes with redoubled zeal. Atop the tower, even Angron gave pause to glare at his former brother. Yet the spell was broken as the Red Angel howled and launched himself at the lion. Their mighty blades clashed again and again, sparks raining from each impact. The sword Samanarius struck the lion's shield and rebounded in a concussion pulse of light and force. Several of the black armored Space Marines who accompanied the lion lunged to take advantage of the opening of the Demon Primarch's guard, and only now did Azrael register with disquiet the resemblance to the warriors of the fallen. Angron swept Spinegrinder in a roaring arc, and bloodied corpses scattered away from him. Azrael saw the lion bark in order, and suddenly the black-armored warriors melted away, down the tower steps towards the battle below. The lion now backed away from his foe, and Angron stormed after him. Azrael realized this was no retreat, but rather an attempt to draw Angron away from the fallen Dante. Back and forth across the tower top, the two demigods battled, Angron raining a constant storm of blows upon his foe, while the lion demonstrated sublime martial skill in fending off or evading every strike. Flames and roiling mists whirled about the two combatants, tattering apart each time another shockwave burst from the lion's shield. Azrael was torn away from the spectacle as a hail of bolt shells whipped up from below to ricochet from the Deathwing Terminator's formidable armor. Vox-amplified howls rose, warning of a fresh band of World Eaters storming up the gantries from the street level to assault Azrael's position. He realized he had been entranced by his Gene Sire's arrival, but there was a battle to be fought in the here and now. But even as he rose and let fly into the foes climbing up from below, Azrael could not deny himself a last glance at the tower top. Jonson looked directly at Azrael, and their eyes locked. The sensation of his Primarch's regard hit Azrael like a physical blow. Fire seemed to race through his veins. No words could they exchange, yet in that moment, the Supreme Grand Master knew precisely what his Gene Sire wished of him. Jonson was risking himself to drive the rampaging demon Primarch away, not only from his own Scions, but from the Blood Angels also. That left Commander Dante and any others of his honor guard who might still cling to life, lying wounded amidst the ruins. There was a blood debt there, a matter of honor and duty that the Dark Angels could not ignore. Azrael had his quest from his liege lord, and he would see it completed. Whatever came after, he would deal with it if he lived that long. The lion leapt from the tower top and vanished from sight. Roaring his hate, Angron lunged in pursuit. Brandishing the Sword of Secrets, Azrael stepped forward to meet his own onrushing foes. For the lion! His war cry was taken up by the Deathwing, and then by all the Dark Angels fighting the Warpforged Palace. Soon the air rang with their shouts, even over the thunder of battle and the endless churning of the planet's infernal machines. Now into the Warpforged Palace, the two crashed as they continued their battle away from the Loyalists. Jonson was disgusted at his former brother's hideous form, contemptuous of the monster Angron had made of himself. Yet, he did not underestimate the supernatural might that the Dark Hypothesis had granted the Demon Primarch. The lion fought with every iota of skill he possessed, channeling all the lessons he had learned about combating wild and warp-tainted beasts. For his part, Angron felt little beyond the furious pounding of the butcher's nails. He dimly recognized the lion, but Jonson was just another foe to be slain. An eternal and unending rage and hate had blunted the Red Angel's capacity to revile one enemy more than another. Angron would take his once brother's head for quarrel, just as he had taken those of so many of the lion's gene sons already that day. The two demigods fought their way through the mechanical plateau, where piston columns pounded maniacally and jets of white-hot flame erupted from hidden apertures. Angron sought to lop Jonson's head from his shoulders, but fealty was there to block the blow. Seminarius rebounded against the Emperor's shield, and as the shockwave drove Angron back, the lion seized the chance to duck around a pummeling row of pistons and gain some space. Angron dropped his head and bowled straight through the slabs of machinery. He bellowed as he wrenched aside sparking mechanisms and hacked apart steel-braided sinew, only to recoil as the lion smashed the Emperor's shield into his face. But Jonson retreated again, a strategy cohering in his mind as he clattered down a spiraling brass stairway. He was gaining a sense of his foe. Angron was a devastatingly powerful and unrelenting enemy, but the lion thought he knew how he might defeat his former brother. His train of thought was disrupted as the stairway gave a violent lurch. Looking up, Jonson saw Angron had taken to the air, letting his weapons dangle from their chain manacles as he grasped the stairway's superstructure, then wrenched the entire edifice away from the side of the mechanical plateau. With an oath, the lion leapt clear as the spiral stair buckled under its own weight and collapsed. He dropped, cloak rippling behind him, and landed atop the roof of a Gothic ruin. Angron fell upon him like a roaring thunderbolt, spat from skies of dancing flame. The Primarch's weapons clashed and clashed again, as the lion gave ground before the enemy's brutal onslaught. Lost to rage, Angron might have been, but hardwired instinct, coupled with the dark gifts of the patron gods, lent him tremendous martial skill. Unleashing a flurry of blows upon the lion, he forced open a gap in his opponent's guard before landing a kick to Jonson's chest that cracked his armor and threw him through a statue with punishing force. Sensing what was coming next, Jonson kept rolling even as Angron's axe slammed into the rooftop where he had been a split second before. Reaching the roof's edge, the lion threw himself out into thin air and dropped onto a tilted metal platform some 30 feet below. He rolled with the impact and came up in a god stance, shooting a quick look at his surroundings as he did so. The sight that greeted him was a surreal one. This region of the Warpforged Palace appeared to have contorted atop vast, unseen gimbals, so that what had been a flat plane of riveted metal plates had now become a treacherous landscape of steeply angled ramps. Crackling energy pylons thrust skyward from between the crooked plates. Angron swooped from atop the Gothic ruin and fell upon the lion again. This time, the lion was ready. Dropping to one knee, he raised the Emperor's shield and caught the full force of Angron's meteoric descent upon it. Golden energy erupted in a tremendous shockwave, and the Red Angel was hurled back to smash down amidst the precarious battling war machines. If the lion had expected a moment of respite from this gambit, he was disappointed. Angron rose with an incensed howl and hurled a World Eater predator towards the lion with an underhanded swing of his axe. Seeing the improbable projectile coming, Jonson dove aside. However, he was not quick enough to avoid the next tank, a Dark Angel Impulsor, that Angron sent slamming and bouncing end over end in his direction. The vehicle hit the lion and smashed him back into the wall of the Gothic ruin hard enough to crater the stonework. Angron howled and charged, beating his wings to give himself more impetus. Bloodied and in pain, but knowing he had moments to act, the lion heaved aside the crumpled wreck of the Impulsor and leapt atop it. He spared a moment's thought for his Gene sons, slain within the ruined vehicle, and anger smoldered within him. Angron leapt to strike, and the lion dove aside, leaping away from the wreck and hammering the Emperor's shield into the back of Angron's skull as he went. Propelled forward by the blow, the Red Angel smashed headlong into the ruin and was buried in an avalanche of rubble as the wall came down upon him. Jonson backed swiftly away, limping slightly, dimly aware of tanks still dueling around him, even as he kept his attention on the rubble heap. He knew Angron could not be so easily defeated, but he hoped at least he had wounded his former brother. If nothing else, the ignominy of being buried alive would have stoked Angron's fury to new heights, something the lion was counting on. The rubble heap erupted. Flaming chunks of masonry rocketed through the air, several striking tanks with the force of wrecking balls. Angron came at the lion in a red blur, eyes blazing hate, weapons swinging wildly. So sudden and ferocious was the assault that even Jonson could not react in time. He managed to bring the Emperor's shield up between himself and Angron, but the angle was poor, and the titanic discharge of energy threw him backwards as violently as his foe. The ground fell away beneath the lion as he tumbled back and then down into the fume-wreathed gulfs beneath the tilted platforms. Angron bellowing a war cry and then plunged after him. The lion smiled mirthlessly, for here was the perfect environment for the culmination of his strategy. He faded into the smog, an instant ahead of Angron, who howled with fury to find his opponent vanished. The Red Angel was by now apoplectic. Though incapable of feeling fatigue, Angron was not accustomed to the mounting frustration of fighting one opponent for so long while they maintain a relentless defensive stance. He had claimed no skulls and shed only the merest drops of blood for what had felt an eternity. The insistent pounding of the butcher's nails suffused his being with white-hot agony. His capacity for reason had been drowned in molten fury and pain. To find his foe vanished then was near unbearable. Angron could smell the lion's potent biology and the lapping powders of his armor. He could hear the Primarch's heartbeats, his footfalls, the servo whine of his battle plate. He could glimpse the furnace-like beacon of Jonson's soul burning in the warp sight. Yet the phantasmic smog clouded even Angron's demonic senses. The lion, for his part, had less trouble keeping track of a foe that roared and snarled oaths and imprecations with every heaving breath. Angron hacked at half-imagined ghosts and bellowed with rage. In response, the lion surged suddenly from the flank and struck with the Emperor's shield, sending Angron recoiling into the air with wings beating. The demon Primarch lunged, but Jonson was gone again into the fumes. Angron thundered after his prey. Again the lion evaded, struck, and faded back from his enemy's lightning-fast counterattack. In his mind, he fought monsters again in the mist-wreathed Calibanite forests. A few times, Angron landed a blow. The Emperor's shield was always there to block it and send the demon Primarch reeling back. All the while, Angron's rage mounted until it danced across his body, a spectral flame. His muscles and eyes bulged, as though he might literally burst from the anger swelling within. Then came a piston, rushing up from the depths and discharging steam as it slammed to a halt at its epigee. For a moment, it blasted aside the veil of smog. The lion was revealed in the act of slipping around Angron's flank for yet another goading strike. There was no thought, only primal urge to kill. as Angron beat his wings and hurled himself at the lion like a living avalanche. He swung his weapons in wide arcs as he came, aiming to scissor them through L. Jonson's neck, and a move no shield could possibly block. Yet this time, the lion made no effort to defend. With blistering speed, he instead dropped to one knee, bracing his blade with his whole body, and let Angron slam straight into its raised point. The Demon Primarch's own impetus drove the glowing blade up through his torso until it erupted from the nape of his neck in a fountain of gore. Borne on by the force of Angron's charge, the two demigods rolled and bounced through the fumes. Angron came to rest on his back, one wing penned under him, his corporeal form unable to re-knit its calamitous wound with fealty still transfixing it. The Red Angel thrashed, howled. One clawed hand dug into his wound's sternum to search for the blade's ichor-slick grip. The lion loomed over Angron, armor bloodied, dented. He gripped the Emperor's shield with both hands and gave Angron no time to react. With a roar of his own, Lionel Jonson brought the glowing edge of his shield down upon the Demon Primarch's head, driving it through the bridge of Angron's nose with such force that it embedded itself in the metal surface beneath. Angron's corporeal form detonated like a tank round whose propellant was distilled hate, blasting his animus apart with such tremendous force of released rage that even the Demon Primarch's indomitable will could not draw it back together. L. Jonson was thrown clear of the blast and came back up with his cloak smoldering and his cracked armor scorched. Breathing hard, his body racked with the pain of countless wounds sustained while battling Angron, he limped back to the blood-streaked crater in which fealty lay. As he recovered his blade, the lion felt certain that he would see his former brother again, likely sooner than he might hope. For now, though, Angron was banished. The lion sighed and shook his head. He tuned his armor's vox beat to the Dark Angel's command channel and listened intently. Hefting blade and shield, the Primarch set off south towards the nearest extraction site. As he limped along, he considered his deeds this day, his choice of his Gene Sons over the wider galaxy. He had so much to tell them, so much to do. It was time to rejoin his unforgiven sons, and to begin the work of ensuring his sacrifices had not been in vain. Well, before we go, what do you think of the lion, brother?
Well, I think he was a great tactician and fighter. I do think that he had lack of people skills.
You know who he reminds me of Terran 42 history?
Who?
Hannibal Barca. He's the guy he's the Carthaginian who went over the Alps with the elephants and laid siege to Rome for years. He's the guy that his good friend said, assuredly no man has been blessed with all the gods' gifts. You, Hannibal, know how to gain a victory, yet you do not know how to use it. To me, that reminds me so much of the lion. He could win any battle that you put in front of him, but, I mean, that's all he did. He won battles and moved on to the next one. There wasn't well, what do we do with this victory? It was just moving on.
Right.
But that's what I think. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, like I said, I agree with you on that count. I also think that one of the things that he was lacking was definitely people skills, understanding other people's thoughts. Because, for example, if he had thought about a little bit, he may have thought, oh, well, Luther may be a little jealous and frustrated with how I've been acting and how I've been upshowing everything and sort of not treating him as maybe I should be treating him.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, same with pretty much all of his brothers.
Right. Or at least, with his brothers, maybe
self-aware.
Yeah.
Self-aware. That's what he was lacking. Self-awareness.
Right. Well, and on that note, we're out of time for today. Now, I know we split this up into two. We still, anyways, are going to be doing all the rest of the stuff that we were planning on doing for the Dark Angels, including next week when we do their actions in the Great Crusade, mainly the Rangdan Xenocides.
Fantastic. But if you enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40K lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Asharaka.
And don't forget, if you become one of our members, you get to tell us anyways what you want us to talk about for a month. But most importantly, have a great day. And as always, until next time, this is Zekthar
And Yuxin.
signing off.